Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
You check your Facebook?
Nothing so far. Yeah, so far nothing.
Okay. That didn't work.
Amal said she's trying to join us last 10-15 minutes, but unable to so far.
What about the ship, the attendee link?
Yeah, I have sent her also.
If she cannot access through either one, I think her email will receive a Zoom reminder and the link as well. So that may be a personalized link for her to access Zoom. So that's another alternative she can try.
Okay, and also it looks that here I'm gonna make you post temporarily because I can't seem to understand why after putting the Facebook configuration only YouTube can go live.
Okay. Are you accessing through Meta Business Suite?
Like now in Zoom I cannot stream it.
Okay, because now if you're in Meta Business Suite, you actually can press to go live for ILM. Yeah.
Noor, I think we should start the webinar because, of course, I hope that. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we should. We should start.
I'll follow up with Amal, but you can start.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you can remove me from the speaker as a tag if you want to. Up to you. When you're, yeah.
Okay. I've hit you, so it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Hello everyone. I am my apologies for the technical difficulties and delaying our session today. We are very grateful for your time, and right now this is the second webinar for Islam and Liberty Network's Edraak series, and sorry, just give me a minute. I'm having some technical issues as well.
Ali, you're muted.
No, I was speaking with Amal. She is joining, so that's why I muted myself. Okay. So please continue with introduction, please.
Okay, all right. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of Islam and Liberty Network's webinar series called Edraak, Recognizing Liberty. The topic for today is Tunisia's failed democratic transition. What went wrong? Our session today is quite interesting. We are overlapping between four different time zones. Today I'm here, ILN's program coordinator, Nur Netusha Nusaiba. And I'm very happy to share a little bit about what is the origins of the concept behind Edraak. It's an Arabic word which means to recognize and to understand. It is a new monthly series that we've started and well curated, featuring fellows and supporters of Islam and Liberty Network to help us understand the concept of liberty, its manifestations and implications in theoretical, legal, and social contexts universally. This webinar series will consist of 8 episodes, starting from which we started in July 2004, this year, and will be open to public participation, particularly targeted for students of Islamic studies, social sciences, and other relevant disciplines. Allow me to give you a brief summary of what today's session is going to be about. Since the 2011 Arab Spring, Muslim-majority countries had witnessed rising pressures and expectations from their citizens to ensure the protection of human rights while undergoing democratic transitions. Discussions on human rights and democracy in the Muslim world inevitably include the formation of pro-democratic coalitions between secularists and Islamists, the impact of secularist fears and constituencies on political dynamics, and the prospects for political moderation. By examining the failure of Tunisia's democratic transition, how do we analyze the similarities and differences among democratizing nations with significant Muslim populations? Our main speaker for today is Dr. Radwan Masmoudi. He is the founder and president of the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy, CSID, a Washington-based nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting freedom, democracy, and good governance in the Arab Muslim world. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Center's quarterly publication, Muslim Democrat. And as our discussant for today is Ms. Amal Azuz. She's a former member of the Ennahda Party Shura Council and a former member of the Tunisian Constituent Assembly. She's currently an associate professor of English language, civilization, and literature in the University of Tunis. She's currently pursuing her PhD in political science at the Faculty of Juridical, Political and Social Sciences of Tunis. And of course, moderating this really interesting discussion is Dr. Ali Salman, the CEO of Islam and Liberty Network. He is the author of Islam and Economics, a primer of markets, morality, and justice. And without further ado, I would like to begin the session by having Dr. Ali Salman give some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Noor. Well, I was trying to help Amal Azuz, our discussant, to join the Zoom. She will be joining soon in a few minutes. I thought we should start, and I'm glad that we have started. And welcome again, Dr. Radwan, my good friend from Tunisia, who is currently, of course, in Washington, D.C. My initial introduction with him and CSID was back in Tunis some years back, when CSID supported a workshop in Tunisia. And then we have interacted with various platforms. I think this is very important to have this conversation, particularly from, Tunisia is one of the most important country in the region, where we witnessed the successful transition from an authoritarian system to democracy. Many important leaders and parties have played a role in the transition. Now Tunisia, of course, is facing another wave of challenge of dictatorship, and that's why the very, I would say, provoking title of this seminar, Failed Democratic Transition. And I'm glad that we have probably one of the best speaker, one of the best experts on this subject, Dr. Radwan Masmoudi, with us. As for those who are joining our events for the first time, I'll just say in a very quick manner that our network, Islam and Liberty Network, the main mission of the network is promote a conversation about Islam and democracy, economic freedom, and also personal freedoms, religious freedoms in Muslim majority countries, but also beyond. And so that's our main mission. And we do it through series of events, which includes international conferences, workshops, and research papers. So I think Dr. Ridwan has been talking about democracy, not just in Tunisia, but also broadly in the Muslim world for, I would say, at least 3 decades, if I am not wrong. He is both a scholar in his own right and also activist. So combining both knowledge and experience of mobilizing opinion in in an important and one of the most important places in the world currently. That's his role, and I'm very glad that Dr. Ridwan has joined us today. So I would like to request him to start the presentation, and then we can continue with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali and Noor. It's a pleasure to join you and to be with you today. I've had a long relationship with Dr. Ali and with the Islam and Liberty Network now for more than a decade, and I'm very happy to continue this relationship and this cooperation. So I will be speaking about the what happened in Tunisia or what went wrong. But I want to say from the beginning that I think that the title is a little bit harsh, failed democratic transition. I don't think it has failed yet. I think that it is the democratic transition is continuing in Tunisia. I think that we are going through a downturn or a pushback cycle in Tunisia, but I think that I'm very optimistic that the democratic transition is going to succeed in Tunisia. It may not be immediate because democratic transitions take a long time. That's the main lesson that I think we have to learn from the experience of Tunisia. So for nearly 10 years, from January 2011 until July 2021, Tunisia was regarded by the whole world as the model democracy in the Arab world, as the successful democratic transition, the only one in the Arab world that has succeeded in establishing a true democratic system. It succeeded in adopting one of the most liberal and democratic constitutions, I would say, in the world. Back in 2012, it also succeeded in holding 6 free and fair elections during that decade, 3 parliamentary elections, 2 presidential elections, and 1 local and municipal election. So 3 free and fair elections in 10 years. It had one of the freest media in the whole world, according to the ratings of most NGOs. One of the most active independent civil society in the whole world, thriving civil society. The weakness was the economy. The weakness was that there was no significant improvement in the economic situation during that decade. So on the political side, a lot of improvement, a lot of achievements that I think Tunisians can be proud of, but on the economic side, it really was not moving forward. It was not improving, and that's what created the backlash against democracy, especially when COVID happened in 2020 and 2021. Those were very difficult years for the Tunisian people, especially for the poor. The economic situation was not great, and with COVID it became really terrible, and a lot of people suffered major setbacks for those 2 years. So until July 25, 2021, when the elected president, Qais Said, who was elected back in 2019 with 70% majority, ordered the army to shut down the parliament and shut down the government. And unfortunately, the army obeyed this order, which was clearly unconstitutional and clearly illegal. The army should have said no, but the army was, I think, committed a mistake. But also they were not really ready for this. They were not trained in how to deal with the situation when the chief executive of the country orders the army to shut down the parliament. What can they do? I don't think that they were ready for it. And so they shut down the parliament and they shut down the government, and Qais Said ruled by decree for a year and a half, meaning that his decrees were above the law and above the constitution. He can write by decree whatever he wants, and that has to be the law of the land. For a year and a half, until he wrote a new constitution, himself wrote a new constitution and passed it by a referendum in which only 30% of the people participated. So today, 3 years later, after the coup, most of his opponents and political leaders are now in jail. Many of them without any charges, without any clear charges or specific charges, other than conspiring against the state. Very, very famous, charge against the opposition in all dictatorships. When the dictators, they feel that when the opposition tries to do anything, any kind of opposition, they are conspiring against the state because they have no right to oppose, the dictator. So what happened? Why did this successfully or apparently successful democratic transition fail? Is I think we need to learn some lessons from that, and we need to see what went wrong in order to avoid the mistakes in the future, because I think that the democratic transition is going to continue, but we need to take hold and take stock of what went wrong in order to learn from those mistakes. So I'm going to list 7 mistakes, in my opinion, that we need to learn. Because I've been thinking a lot about this and trying to understand what went wrong. I think the number 1 mistake is that the democratic forces quickly became divided after the revolution. So before the revolution, the democratic forces were united because the enemy was clear, the dictator. Ben Ali was a dictator. Ben Ali was abusing the rights of all the Tunisian citizens. He was corrupt. He was ruthless. So it was easy to unite the opposition against him. As immediately after the revolution, that unity disappeared, and the democratic forces started fighting with each other, sometimes on minor stuff, sometimes on minor issues on which they disagree, which is of course normal that they would disagree, but they forgot that in order to push forward the agenda of the democratic transition, they had to remain united or they will become weak. So this sense of unity quickly disappeared after 2011. I said between 2011 and probably 2013, 2014, they became very divided. And you can see this in the parliament, you can see this even in the streets. A lot of fighting, a lot of difficulties agreeing on the reforms that are needed, agreeing on how to move forward, other than the constitution, which I think was a big achievement in 2012, 2013. But immediately after that, they started fighting over a number of things. I think this is a big mistake and a big problem, because the Democrats, if they are divided, then they became weak, and the enemies of democracy, both in Tunisia and outside of Tunisia, became more united, because now their enemy became clear, which is democracy itself, and so they wanted to derail democracy at whatever cost. I think this unity here is very critical, especially between Islamists and secularists. I think that Tunisians are divided, like the rest of Arab countries, like probably the rest of the Muslim countries, in 2 major camps. the secular camp and the Islamic religious camp. And these two camps are very strong, both of them. They represent about half the population each. So if they are able to agree on a vision, on a common vision, on a common platform for moving the country forward towards democracy, then I think they can succeed. But if they are not agreeing and if they start fighting, then it's very, very difficult to move the country forward towards real democracy. So the main challenge and the main failure is that after the 2011 revolution, these two blocs, the Islamists or Islamic parties, in this case, Nahda is the main one, although there are other smaller Islamic parties as well, but the Nahda is the biggest one. And the secular parties, they started fighting immediately, and this really weakened the democratic transition. So this is the number one mistake, I think, that happened after 2011. Number two mistake is trusting the remnants of the old Ben Ali regime. I think it was naive to think that just because we had a revolution, that all the remnants of the Ben Ali regime have suddenly become Democrats or have suddenly become in favor of democracy and in favor of the revolution. True, some of them or most of them claimed that they have turned the page and that they now believe in democracy and now believe in the goals of the revolution. But I think it was naive to think that for all of them, this was a genuine proclamation, that they really believed in democracy. I think that, there was a lot of discussion in 2012, 2013 about excluding the remnants of the Ben Ali regime from participating in politics. I think it was very divisive between the democratic forces. Some were in favor of excluding the pro-Ben Ali forces and elements, and some were against it because they feared that the state would collapse, that it will be similar to de-Ba'athification in Iraq. But I think that both camps were wrong, that they took the two extreme positions, and they could have agreed on somewhere in the middle, where they could have excluded a limited number of the Ben Ali regime, or a limited number of the pro-Ben Ali forces from participating in politics. And by limited, I mean 100, 200, 300 people, not in the thousands, and certainly not the majority of the pro-Ben Ali forces. But I think there are some elements in the pro-Ben Ali forces that we knew were actively seeking to derail the democratic transition, actively seeking to bring back dictatorship and bring back the Ben Ali regime and practices, and that it would have been more prudent to identify those elements, and they are not very big in numbers, maybe 100, maybe 200, like I said, and say, look, we're not going to punish you for what happened during the Ben Ali era. We're not going to hold you responsible for that. We're not even going to, do anything to you economically or financially, but you have to stay out of politics for a number of years, for 10 years minimum. You cannot be involved in political activities. You cannot be involved in political gatherings or meetings or financing or anything like that. And that is, I think, a way to protect the democratic transition for a number of years from these very strong, very powerful lobbies and individuals who have tremendous resources at their disposal, whether it's the media, whether it's the financial system, the money, the economic, the relationships that they have within the country, outside the country. It would have been better to say, take a break for a number of years. Don't get involved in politics because we need to protect the democratic transition. After 5 or 10 years, you can come back. You, as a normal Tunisian citizen, you have every right to participate in politics. But give us a chance to anchor the democratic transition and the democratic reforms first. So that was mistake number 2, which was too much trusting of the remnants of the Ben Ali regime who were actively seeking to derail the democratic transition. Mistake number 3, now we come to, much later, 2019, 2020. The mistake was not doing anything to stop the coup. Back in 2020, certainly, everybody knew that ISIS Ayed was planning a coup. Even after he was elected immediately in 2019, he started talking about his vision for the country, and it was clear that his vision contradicted everything in the constitution and contradicted everything in the laws of the country, but that he saw himself as above the constitution and above the laws, and that he, as the ruler or as the president, he can do whatever he wants and nobody can stop him. He is the only one who can interpret the constitution. It was clear that he was moving towards a coup, and his statements made that very clear. Yet the opposition did nothing to stop him before the coup. We had almost 2 years, between 2019 until 2021, when he actually closed down the parliament and shut down the government. For 2 months, Tunisia had no government at all, no government, no ministers, no nothing. He ruled by himself for 2 months. We could have stopped the coup if we acted faster. You have to take these threats seriously. The guy was not joking when he was making these statements. And you cannot allow, as the democratic opposition, you cannot allow these statements to continue for 2 years, doing absolutely nothing, hoping that he was just talk and that he really didn't mean it. I think, again, that was too naive, and we paid the price very heavily, because we basically allowed the coup to take place and not doing anything to stop it. So this was mistake number 3. Mistake number 4 is not focusing on social and economic reforms. I think for most of us, whether in civil society or political life, political parties, we tend to emphasize the political aspect. We tend to emphasize the political reforms, the democratic institutions that have to take place, the elections, the constitution, the political parties. The debates that were happening were very, very interesting and very lively, but they meant nothing for the majority of the people. For the majority of the people, they were not really interested in politics. Yes, they had freedom, they had democracy, but that was not a big problem for them. A bigger problem for them became their economic life, their economic situation, which was not improving, and their social life, also was not improving. So I think that was a mistake, again, to focus almost entirely on politics for 10 years and not to try to do better and try to achieve more results in terms of economic justice, that you have to that the poor people in the country, which represent at least 30% of the population, they have to feel that their life is improving. They have to feel that they gained some economic stability, some economic well-being from the revolution 10 years after the revolution. And so I think that you have to give them something. You have to yes, we are asking them to be patient, but patience has its limits, and you have to give them something to hold on, something to give them hope that, please be patient, things are moving forward, things are getting better. And so I think that was mistake number 4, not doing more to support the economic situation and the social situation, especially for the lower class people, the poor, the bottom of the society, people who are struggling to put food on the table, to have the bare minimum to support themselves and their families. And they did not see things improving. And I think it's those people really that turned against the revolution and turned against democracy, because they said, look, we have democracy now for 10 years, but our situation has not improved. And after COVID in 2020, things actually got worse. for these people. So they said, okay, we don't want democracy anymore. So this was number 4. Let me see. So now these are 4 mistakes that I think the domestic forces, the domestic political forces in the country were responsible for. Now I have 3 big mistakes for the international community. I think that the international community also has a role to play in supporting democracy. I think that Tunisia is not a secluded island, is not separate from what happens in the region or what happens around the other countries, and that countries are interfering in Tunisia's political life for good or for bad. You know, some are good, some are bad, but they're all interfering because Tunisia is in the middle of the Mediterranean, very close to, you know, Europe, in the middle of Africa and the Middle East. And so there are a lot of, you know, countries that are interfering. Some have said, we want to help you. We want to help the transition to succeed. We are willing to help you. We really care about seeing democracy succeed in Tunisia and in the Arab world. Some were not really interested in that. We're not really interested in democracy. And in fact, we're trying to derail democracy and trying to make it fail because they saw it as a threat to their own stability or their own political system. So what are the 3 biggest mistakes for the international community? Here, of course, I'm talking about those who wanted to help, those who wanted to see democracy succeed. Number 1 is not providing enough economic support. There was support, but it just was not enough. You know, Tunisia needed a Marshall Plan, needed something big to stabilize the economy for 10, 20 years until people became, until the economic reforms and the political reforms were implemented and made a difference. It takes time for the reforms to be implemented, and it takes time for them to make a difference, to show results and to show improvements. And I think I argued even, you know, from 2011, 2012, I begged the United States, because I live in the United States. I'm a Tunisian American citizen, so I go back and forth between Tunisia and Washington all the time, you know, for the last 40 years. I begged the United States to please do more for economically. You know, don't interfere with the political system. The political system has to be decided by the Tunisians, and I think it's better for foreign countries, including those who want to help Tunisia, not to interfere in the political disputes, but help the economy, support the economy, do something like a Marshall Plan, like you did for Eastern Europe after World War II, Western Europe after World War II, and Eastern Europe after the fall of communism and the Wall of Berlin. The United States provided hundreds of billions of dollars to support those countries to re-establish their economy and strengthen their economy and to facilitate the democratic transition. So I argued, why not do the same thing? You know, maybe not hundreds of billions, but certainly into the billions to Tunisia to support the economy for 5-10 years and give Tunisia a chance to succeed. And in fact, at the G8 summit in May 2011, the group of G8 promised $20 billion in aid to Tunisia and Egypt, 2 countries who were on the path to democracy back then in 2011, 2012. But none of that materialized. None of those $20 billion that were promised were materialized. Instead, Tunisia continued to receive, you know, a few $100 million, $100 to $200 million from the United States, $100 to $200 million from the EU, the European Union. Was really peanuts. It was really nothing that could sustain the economy. So this is mistake number 5. The mistake number 6 is focusing too much on strengthening security, especially after 2015. Security became the number 1 goal. instead of supporting democracy, instead of supporting the economy, all the assistance, I would say at least 70, 80% of the assistance provided to Tunisia from the United States, from the international community, from the European Union, all went into security and providing security, which meant strengthening the army and strengthening the police in order to confront terrorism, which of course there was a growing threat, if we remember, in those years between 2012, 2014, 15. Even in 15, there was a couple of attacks in Tunisia, terrorist attacks on tourism hotels and things. But I think it was out of proportion. It really took away from the support for democracy and for the economy. It strengthened the army a little bit too much. It strengthened the police a little bit too much. And I think that for a nascent democracy, it's dangerous to give the security system all that money. The budget of the military basically tripled. The budget of the police basically tripled in those 2 or 3 years. Of course, in the name of fighting terrorism, which I think is legitimate, but there was no balance. There was too much going into the security system and definitely not enough going into economy or economic development and politics and democracy and democratic institution building. So I think, again, that was mistake number 6. Mistake number 7 is turning a blind eye to interference from abroad. It was very clear from 2012 and 2013 especially that the regional powers, namely the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt, had agreed that they wanted to derail democratic transitions in the Arab world, that they saw democracy as a threat. They needed to stop this Arab Spring, which was taking hold in many Arab countries, and that they saw democracy as a threat to themselves and to their stability, and therefore they must derail it. And they did. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, now in Sudan, but also in Tunisia. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars in Tunisia to derail the democratic transition starting in 2012. This is not something new. And the United States knew what was going on. The European Union knew this was very obvious, and they stated publicly their goal. They were not even shy about saying that they saw democracy as a threat, and that they needed to stop this democratic transitions. Former President Marzouki even sent a letter to President Obama back in 2012 about this interference from UAE, Saudi Arabia, and other countries in the region to derail the democratic transition in Tunisia, that they were spending millions of dollars in Tunisia to derail the democratic, and asking Obama to put pressure on these countries, which after all were friendly to the United States and would probably listen to advice or pressure from the United States to back off and let Tunisia succeed. But he never received a response from Obama. Marzouki did not receive a response to that letter that he sent in 2012, asking for help to protect the only democratic transition in the Arab world. Baji Qaid al-Sibsi, the second elected president after Marzouki, 2014, 2015, announced publicly on TV in an interview with one of the journalists in Tunisia that he had received offers from UAE of a lot of money, probably around 5 billion a year for 5 years, which is a lot of money for Tunisia, from the UAE alone, as investments, as grants, as loans, whatever you want. We will support you economically, but on one condition, is that you have to ban al-Nahda, you have to put them in jail, You don't include them in the government. You don't include them in the parliament. We have to stop this democratic transition, basically, and put Ennahda, the biggest party at that time, or at least the second largest biggest party, representing at least 30%, 30 to 40% of the population, put them in jail and ban them and this and that. And he said this publicly. He refused the offer because he was a Democrat. He believed in democracy. And he said, the interest of Tunisia is more important to me than the money being offered from the UAE. But again, this proves that the UAE was doing everything it can to dismantle or derail the democratic transition in Tunisia. So in conclusion, these are, I think, are the 7 biggest mistakes that we can learn from the failure or partial failure, let's say, the lack of success of the democratic transition. And I think that democratic transitions are very difficult and they take a long time. You know, this is a fact. We have to be patient when we're talking about democratic transition. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen in 1 year or 2 years, probably not even in 10 years. They require patience. It requires patience and perseverance, but also firmness. You have to be balanced between patience and firmness. If you are too patient, you end up not implementing any real reforms, not moving quickly enough, and that also weakens the democratic transition. So you need to be patient, but not too patient. You also need to be firm in implementing the reforms. And finally, that democratic transitions need massive economic support from the international community. If we really want democracy to succeed in the world, in Tunisia or anywhere else, the West, the European Union, the United States, all the countries that care about democracy must create a fund to support these countries that are going through democratic transitions, because they are very difficult and they take a long time, but they need to stabilize the economy during that transition period. These are some of the lessons, I think, that we learned from Tunisia. I remain very optimistic because we have elections coming up next month, actually, on October 6th, presidential elections. The Tunisian opposition has decided to participate in these elections, not to boycott these elections like it did for the last 3 years. There is a tremendous activism, tremendous hope in Tunisia right now that the opposition is going to be able to get rid of Qais Said through the democratic process, because even though he dismantled a lot of the democratic institutions, he did not dismantle, and he cannot dismantle all the democratic institutions, and he cannot dismantle the hope and the aspirations of the Tunisian people. So there is still a lot of hope that Tunisia will regain the momentum and will get back on the road to democracy. Thank you very much, Ali. I'm sorry if I took a little bit longer, but I tried to summarize it as much as I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizwan. I think this was very comprehensive, and I appreciate a very the picture you have painted. It's realistic, I would say. You have covered both the domestic factors and international factors. And while I will request the audience to type in their questions or comments in the Q&A box, I have my couple of thoughts to share. While I would also like to mention that our discussant, Ms. Amal Azuz, has not been able to join, but we are still helping her. Maybe she can find a way. There's this internet and connectivity issue as we speak. At her end in Tunisia, and then probably that's causing trouble. But I have a couple of thoughts on your presentation, Dr. Rizwan. And first is that I appreciate that you mentioned the role, the failings, I would say, of different political parties in the last 10 years after the Arab Spring. In economic development and in so many other aspects. But I have two questions. One is that since Nahda was a part of coalition, and it meant that there was a successful coalition politics which Tunisia experienced. And that would normally mean one thing, that there is a broad consensus in political parties on rules of game. That, okay, we have now ushering into a democratic era, so we can work together, we can go to the public. So that consensus should have meant more stronger democratic alliances as, through the years. But it seems that with the rise of President Kassai, this strength, this alliance was not there. It's also, I think it's very evident in your presentation that there was not strong enough opposition to that dictatorial leader which Tunisia had now. So that's one sort of puzzle I have. And secondly, since I have visited Tunisia, it's a great country and great people, I would say that one thing which also raised a question to me was the constitution itself. The constitution, did it bring any limitation on the authority of the president to suspend the parliament, to dissolve the parliament? It seemed that he had at least a legal right to do it when he got the power. And I'm wondering if, going back, retrospectively, as a Democrat yourself, how would you judge that as a possible failure of the political parties? Because I know that Tunisia, crafted a new constitution. There was a constituent assembly after the Arab Spring, and this was not addressed adequately in terms of constitutional checks and balances, because the idea of democracy is really not perhaps one person, good person or bad person, but if a person like Kassai comes into power, does the system has strong checks and balances to exit, to make him exit? These are my sort of initial thoughts. If you want to address that, and then we will move on to Q&A.
Sure. First of all, on the first question of the coalition between Nahda and Nida, it was an attempt to unite the secular forces. In this case, mostly Nida Tunis represented the remnants of the former regime, the Destour party, the nationalist party in Tunisia, with the Islamist Nahda party. Between them, they had a clear majority, 60-70% of the votes. And the hope was that they will be able to govern. But really, this coalition was very weak. This coalition was not a real coalition. It was not on clear objectives and clear guidelines or clear programs even. And so the coalition was very limited between two men, mostly between Rashid Ghannouchi and Beji Qaid al-Sibsi, and they worked together. They said, let's unite, let's work together to strengthen democracy. They agreed on that goal, but there was no clear program for the reforms, whether political or economic, no clear guidelines on how they're going to do power sharing. And Nahda, in fact, for those 5 years between 2014 until 2019, had only one minister in the whole government. At the later days, they increased, I think, to 3 ministers, but still very small, because the government has over 35 ministers. So it was less than 10% of the ministers. So it was mostly a Nida Tunis government, because Nida Tunis had won the elections of 2014, had won the presidency, had won the majority in the parliament. So I think the idea of the coalition was good, but it was not well. It was not well prepared. It was not really well thought out. It was not well developed in terms of what exactly is our goal, how are we going to work together and all that. And I think, again, it's normal during the transition period because both political parties, in fact, Nida Tunis basically was dismantled, disappeared, and broke up into like 10 or more different parties immediately after the election of 2014. I think in 2015, 2016, the party itself, Nida Tunis, did not exist anymore. They split up and they started fighting with each other and all that. Nahda also had a lot of problems because of this coalition. A lot of people within the party were angry with Ghannouchi about this coalition. They did not know exactly what the goal was or what the coalition meant, or whether it was a real alliance or not. Whether what are we doing? What are the reforms that we have agreed to? It seemed like really it was not well planned out, and that's why ultimately it failed, I think, in 2019. In the constitution, actually, I think it was also a compromise. I think that the majority of the people wanted a parliamentarian system, not a presidential system. We brought in a lot of experts from all over the world. And all of them agreed, or I would say 90% of them agreed, that a parliamentarian system would be better than a presidential system, that a presidential system would be dangerous because you are putting too much power into the hands of one man in a presidential system, and that during the democratic transition, the democratic institutions are still very weak, and the president can overwhelm these institutions and can take over these institutions. So it was a compromise in the constitution between a parliamentarian system and the presidential system. That's what they agreed on, because neither side could win outright. So the constitution was not really a parliamentarian system, but also was not a presidential system. Somehow they agreed on a compromise, semi-presidential, semi-parliamentarian system. Again, I think that was also a mistake. However, the constitution did not provide the president the right to close down the parliament. It does exactly the opposite. Even in terms of an emergency, even in terms of Article 80, which the president used on July 25 to shut down the parliament, even in that article, Article 80 says that the president cannot close the parliament, and that the parliament must remain open, must remain in operation. Actually, during that what do they call it, emergency period, the parliament must be open 24 hours because the parliament has to be able to confront this emergency. So this is why many of us said this is ridiculous. What Qais Said did on July 25 is clearly against the constitution. The constitution specifically says he cannot shut down the parliament or close the parliament, and he cannot shut down the government either. He does not have the power to close down the government or replace the government. It's only the parliament that can do that, and both of them cannot do it during the emergency period, which he declared on July 25. So again, I think that what he did was clearly unconstitutional. That's why I called it a coup d'etat from the beginning. Some other Tunisians said, well, maybe we can be lenient and give him the benefit of the doubt. Well, I think we all know that he did not deserve the benefit of the doubt, and that it turned out to be a really ugly coup d'etat in which he now controls everything. It's a dictatorship of the worst kind that we now have in Tunisia, and that it was a mistake of those who supported him in the beginning.
Thank you for these very detailed answers, Dr. Masmoudi. I would like to refer to some of the questions which the participants have posed. One question by Tariq Al-Baradi. I think you can also see it on your screen. One is on the economy, actually. And he seems to suggest that the economy deteriorated right after the Arab Spring. And your comments on that. Secondly, the question is about the corruption, which according to Mr. Tariq has been a rampant feature post Arab Spring regimes in Tunisia, and whether the Marshall Plan, which you are suggesting, faced any issues or reluctance from US or EU from due to the corruption issues. And then last point in this question is, you're still optimistic about the situation. What is the source of your optimism? If you like to address these questions, please.
Sure. The economy, I would say that in the first 3 years, 2011, 12, and 13, the economy grew about 3%, which was not bad. It was lower than before. It was certainly lower than what people needed and wanted to see. But 3.5% was not bad. And actually, there was a huge momentum at that time to focus on the economy. After 2014, actually dropped very quickly to around 1% growth per year. In the last few years, it's actually dropped to less than 0.5% growth per year. And of course, the worst 2 years were the COVID years, 2020 and 2021. The economy shrunk by 20%. The GDP, the gross domestic product, shrunk by 20% in 2020 and by, I think, 9% in 2021. Those were the worst economic crises that I think Tunisia has had in many, many decades. And they were related to COVID, but also related to the fact that the government was not able to provide assistance to, like we did here in the United States and many other countries. You need to boost the economy, to support the economy. The government did absolutely nothing. So I think that, yes, the economy remains a big challenge. I think that during the democratic transition, you will have economic challenges. It's difficult. Without a Marshall Plan, without massive support from the international community, the economy goes down. The reason it goes down is because you are entering a period of uncertainty. You are changing the constitution. You are changing the laws of the country. And
Can I interrupt you, Dr. Ridwan?
Yes.
Because the next part of the question is about the corruption issue, which,
yes,
according to the person, has also created an impression US not to extend any Marshall Plan to Tunisia. Do you agree with the perception of persistent corruption after the Arab Spring in the regimes?
Yes, of course. Corruption remains the number one problem in Tunisia before the revolution, after the revolution, before the coup, and after the coup. I mean, the coup of Qais Said supposedly was under the slogan of fighting corruption. And all the Tunisians now know and agree that he hasn't done anything to fight corruption. It's a big problem. It's a big, huge challenge. And I think that the experts on democratic transitions agree. Thomas Carothers is one of them here at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He wrote a book about this, that in the early stages of the democratic transition, you tend to see corruption increase rather than decrease. Because the democratic institutions are still weak. They're not strong enough to fight corruption. But you're also destroying the previous regime, which was very strong. It was dictatorship. But at least it limited corruption into the allies, the hands of the few allies of the regime and the few allies of the president. Now you are democratizing corruption. Everybody can become corrupt after the revolution, and the democratic institution and also the democratic culture are still weak, still young to be able to confront this huge threat of corruption. I think obviously corruption is the biggest problem, not only in Tunisia, but all over the world. Corruption is a huge problem. And democratic transitions will struggle with corruption, especially in the beginning, because it's not easy. It's not easy. You have to change the mentality of people. You have to change the culture of people. I think that corruption is not only the few people at the top who are benefiting, and yes, they tend to be the more corrupt people, but during dictatorship, corruption becomes normal. People become used to corruption, that you have to pay a bribe in order to get anything done, and they legitimize it. They say, well, it's a gift, it's not really a bribe. I have to do this because if I don't do this, I will get nothing done. It becomes part of the culture. And that's why, again, it's very, very difficult to fight corruption, because the majority of the people are involved in corruption. It's not just a minority of people. It's not a handful of people, especially after, like I said, after the democratic transition or after the revolution, the institutions became weak. So you need to rely on the culture against corruption. It is the most difficult problem, I think, in Tunisia, and it takes time. This is one of the reasons why it takes a long time for democratic transitions to succeed, to be able to confront corruption. The last question is about optimism. Yeah. Why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for two reasons. First of all, the 10 years of democratic transition that we had in Tunisia between 2011 until 2021 gave the Tunisian people a strong taste of democracy. People experienced democracy, experienced freedom, experienced what it means to be free to criticize the ruler, the president, the government, anybody. I think that even though they were disappointed in the results of the democratic transitions, I don't think they're willing to give up those freedoms. I don't think that the majority of Tunisian people, after having tasted freedom for 10 years, are going to give up on that goal of being free and being in a democracy. So that's one reason. The second reason is, I think God has blessed Tunisia with a dictatorship that is crazy, that really is very stupid, is very, very disorganized. Ben Ali was a dictator, but Ben Ali was smart, and Ben Ali was shrewd, and Ben Ali had advisors with him who were very talented and who were very capable. So he ran the government and he ran the country and produced economic stability and economic development to a certain level. This guy literally has no ability to govern at all. He does not have any advisors. Even on the economic level, economy is now at a much, much worse situation than ever before, including in those 10 years. And people are fed up with it. It's a dictatorship of the worst kind. And his popularity right now, I think, is down at, maybe 10%, maybe 15%. If we do the elections right, if the elections are free and fair, there is no question that he will lose in the elections. He has no chance of winning these elections in October. If he rigs the election, then it will be very obvious that he rigged the election, and the people will really turn against him, because people will not. What has carried him through the last 5 years is the initial popular support that he got, because he got elected with 70%, and he built and he rode on that wave of popular support. But that popular support has disappeared. And that's another reason why I'm optimistic that we are going to get back to the democratic path.
Thank you. I'd like to take up a few more questions. So one broader theme of your presentation today, Dr. Ridwan, has been the role of international community. You build expectations in terms of Marshall Plan and in terms of democratic strengthening. You also highlighted the negative role which regional countries have played in democratic transition. There are a couple of questions on that. So one question is specific to the role which international community may play in the context of decree number 54, which is on cybercrime, and 88, which is NGOs. which has accelerated democratic backsliding. And how, in your opinion, can the international community address that? And if I can quickly add another question here, which is part of the international role here. We have seen, and you have also highlighted the foreign actors, and including President Said, has exploited the issue of migration to extract security assistance from EU. But the question really is that if this is the case, and why they have not been able to extract significant economic assistance, for migration issue. If you'd like to address these points, please.
Yes, I believe that the role of the international community in supporting democratic transitions in general around the globe is essential. I think I tried to explain in this paper why, but without economic assistance, without international community, the democratic nations of the world really having clear strategies for supporting transitions to democracy, I don't think any democratic transition will succeed. I don't think anywhere in Tunisia or in Pakistan or in any country. The reason is that the democratic transition is very, very difficult, and it does not yield immediate results, whether on the political front or on the economic front. It takes a long time for these reforms to be implemented and then to improve the situation and to see results. It takes more than 10 years. It could take 20 years. Somewhere between 10 and 20 years is, I think, a reasonable expectation. We can see even South Korea as an example. There are many, many examples, but South Korea, just as an example, after the 1987 revolution against dictatorship in South Korea, Korea received massive economic support from the West, from the United States, from the European Union. Massive investments, hundreds of billions of dollars went into South Korea, and it stabilized the economy. While the Korean people were building their democratic institutions and working on their democratic transition, the economy was improving. And this is the key to the success of the democratic transition in South Korea. And then again, I think that if you look at the experience of any countries, that there is the international community has a very important role to play. I think in the case of Tunisia, the international community has failed in really standing up for Tunisia and really delivering economic assistance, massive economic assistance to Tunisia to stabilize the economy while the Tunisian people are working on their transition and democratic reforms and so on. So there was some support, but it was very, very minimal, and it was not, as I mentioned, focused on the economy. Rather, it was focused on security, on the military, on the police, on training, on fighting terrorism, and so on. I think that was a really big mistake and a missed opportunity for Tunisia, but also for the world. I think the world will be better off if we have more democracies in the Arab world. We will have less wars, we will have more stability, we will have more development, we will have less immigration, and illegal immigration is now turning Europe and the United States into populist nations that could become fascist nations because of the problem of illegal migration, which again shows how much these countries are tied together. The future is tied together. If you don't support democracy in Tunisia, your own democracy will become a threat. Your own stability will become a threat. And I think we need this bigger vision. We need this bigger role for the international community to understand that supporting democracy in Tunisia is not a charity. We're not doing it because of a charity. We're not doing it because United States or European Union feels good about giving money to other people. That is a charitable, the US is not a charitable organization. It is in the interest of the United States to support democracy, and to support democracy massively. Otherwise, we're going to be supporting wars, and we're going to be spending billions on wars, and maybe trillions on wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, now in Gaza, and everywhere. We're spending billions and trillions of money on wars. Why don't we spend? I think it is a lot smarter to spend even 10%, even 5% of that money on democracy and democratic transitions, so that these countries can develop themselves, and these countries can build good governance and good governments that respect the citizens of their people, and they can have more stability, they can have more economic development. I think that's in the interest of the United States. But sometimes it's hard, to explain this to politicians, whether in the US or in the EU, who are very short-sighted. They want to see the results immediately. They don't want to wait, 5 years or 10 years to see the benefits of democracy. They are looking and focusing only on the immediate problems, the immediate threats, and there is short length, short vision. We are not focusing on the long-term benefits of democracy. We are focusing on the short-term benefits of dictatorships.
Yeah, I think this is a very significant statement which you are making, Dr. Ridwan, about the international role. And I was wondering, I'm thinking about also Pakistan's case, where historically our military regimes in the past have received actually far more support from US and other international institutions than the democratic governments. And that has led to a degree of economic growth in military regimes in the past, which have created this perception in the minds of people that, okay, when we have dictatorship, military dictatorship is perhaps better for the economy, whereas the answer might be elsewhere. So this is role of US government and US foreign policy in particular has not been helpful for democratic transition in so many countries, and it may be a pursuance of special interest rather than pursuance of any universal values, some people would like to think. But let me just move to the last part of the webinar. It has been very interesting speaking with you and engaging with these questions. One of the last question is, let me pick your mind on this pushback from Sheikh Osama Hassan. He asked this question when you were talking about mistake number 2 and suggested enforcement of a 10 years ban from the old guard, 10 years ban or 10 years exclusion from politics. And the Sheikh Osama is asking, isn't it undemocratic for you to demand that? I don't know how would you respond to that? And then I'll move to the next part.
Well, I think that, no, it's not undemocratic. And I think it's that you must be able to protect the democratic process, especially in the early stages when it's like a baby. It's not yet mature. It's not yet strong enough to defend itself. To me, it's like a baby. When you have a son and he's 18 or 20 years old, you don't need to defend him anymore. You can tell him, okay, go on your own. You can work, you can study, you can do whatever, you can build your life. The parents you are not gonna be here to protect you anymore, right? But you cannot do that to a baby who's only 3 months old or 6 months old or even 2 years old. You need to protect that baby because the baby is not yet able to defend himself. The baby is still weak. There are too many threats around that baby. I think it's very, very similar about democracy and democratic transitions. During that 10-year period, you are in a weak state. You are building the democratic transitions, but the institutions are still very weak. In many cases, the institutions have not do not exist yet. They are still being formed. It takes years to establish. For example, one of the biggest weaknesses that caused the coup to succeed in 2019 is that we did not have yet a constitutional court, which is a vital instrument or institution in a democracy. But it took more than 5 years or 6 years after the constitution was passed, and we still did not have a constitutional court. So I think you need to defend that democratic process, the transition to democracy. Now, how do you do it? Yes, you have to do it democratically, and therefore I am also against banning all the elements of the prior regime. That I think would be undemocratic, to say everybody who had any role in the former regime has to be excluded. No, that's not fair, because many of them were part of the regime, but only on the side, only because it was their job. They had to work, they had to support their families. So not everybody is going to be an enemy of democracy. Many of them have converted and said, yes, I believe in democracy. Even if they don't believe in democracy, they don't represent a threat to democracy. So what I argued, even back then, but especially now, is that you can identify a small number of leaders, 100 or 200, of the pillars of the old regime, the pillars, the people who are very influential, the people who have money, people who are dangerous because they have connections, and the people supported dictatorship and supported human rights violations of the worst kind, and they knew about them and they supported them. It's not like the majority of the people who can say, look, I had no idea what was going on, I was not involved. No, these people, they knew what was going on and they supported it. And they have a huge amount of support financially among the business class or in the media and all that. And I think it's naive to say, okay, now because we have a revolution, now because we started our democratic transition, you have all the rights to be active participant in politics. No, because you are a threat to democracy because of what you did in the last 20 years or 30 years. You are a threat to our nascent democracy, and we need to protect this nascent democracy. So I think we can find a middle ground. Not ban the majority, allow the majority of them to participate in politics and in everything, but identify a small number of people who are dangerous to the democratic transition, who represent a threat to the democratic transition. Not punish them. I'm not advocating punishing them, putting them in jail, or even taking away their money or their business or anything like that. They have the right to continue their businesses and whatever, but just exclude them from political activities for 10 years in order to allow the democratic transition to become stronger, to the democratic institutions to become stronger. Then they can come back, even if they are anti-democratic. They can come back, but at that time, the baby has grown. The baby is now able to defend itself against these imminent threats.
There was a follow-up clarification by Sheikh Osama, and he's suggesting whether it can be done through a legal process. But then there is also a risk of abuse by the legal process if you want to ban certain personalities or certain parts of the old regime. So,
it's a very good question. This reminds me that I was actually with Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi in 2013 when they were discussing this law in the parliament, in the final days of discussing this law to ban or not to ban the members of the old regime. I was with Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi here in Washington, and I gave him my opinion, which is what I'm saying now, is that we can identify 100 or 200 of the top leaders of the old regime and ban them from political activities. And I thought that was a reasonable position, not extreme in one way or the other. And his answer was exactly what Sheikh Osama, I think, said, is that, you have to do it through the legal process. And it would be very difficult if you did it through the legal process, through the judges. First of all, it would take years. And secondly, why would you ban this guy and not that guy? It never ends. Why did you pick this guy and not that guy? On what basis? And so, no, I don't think you can do it through the legal process. That's part of the problems. That's why democratic transitions are messy. That's why revolutions are messy. You have to be firm. It's not everything is going to be perfect from day one. It is naive to think that, hey, we're going to have a perfect democracy and perfect justice from day one. Everything is going to be perfect. Everybody can have their rights from day one. I think that is naive. And I think that that sometimes democracy becomes its worst enemy because sometimes it is naive. It does not understand the threats that are against it, and it does not act quickly enough to stop those threats. Yes, there are very fundamental human rights principles and democratic values that must be respected, but also we must protect our democracy. We must defend our democratic process, especially in those initial 5 to 10 years. So I think, again, this is one of the lessons. I think in Tunisia, we were too naive in allowing the elements of the old regime to do whatever the heck they wanted. And we knew they were funding individuals and people and organizations to destroy the democratic process. And ultimately, they succeeded. After 10 years, they succeeded because they kept hitting and hitting and hitting for 10 years, especially in the media. They controlled the media for 10 years. And they made the Tunisian people, believe it or not, hate the word democracy after 10 years because of this, media attacks on the idea of democracy itself. So, we cannot be naive. We have to be democratic, but we have to be able to defend our democracy also against these threats, whether domestic or international.
Right. I really like to take up the last question. There are more, but I would, I think we'll have to respect the time also. And these are two sort of maybe apparently unrelated, but there may be a link to these questions. One of the questions was about the role of religion and whether this is still playing a role, because you mentioned the split between Islamists and secularists in Tunisia, and you saw similarities beyond Tunisia, in terms of the attitudes toward democracy, and whether you see some kind of evolution. Of course, we are aware of how Sheikh Rashid al-Ghanouchi himself evolved the thought from Islamic Democrat to Muslim Democrat. But a question which is really interesting in the last is this geopolitics, and it's about the role UAE and Israel in particular. And the question is that why they would oppose democracy in Tunisia and see that as a threat to their national interest. They might consider an Islamist or Muslim Brotherhood regime in Tunisia as a threat, but why democracy? So if you want to combine these two different questions, and then we'll end it here.
Sure. First of all, the role of religion is obviously the most difficult question in any democracy. It still is, by the way, even in the West. Trump right now is winning because he has the support of the evangelicals in the United States, and the evangelicals represent at least 30% of the voters. It's not a small bloc. It's a huge bloc. And so he knows how to cater to their vision. Basically, for example, anti-abortion. So if he declares that he's anti-abortion, he immediately gets their support, 30% of the voters. Anti-immigration, because they are a threat to the Christian values, because most of the immigrants are not Christian, or a significant number of them are not Christian. So the role of religion is very, very complicated. It's very, very difficult for any nation. Even in Israel, Israel does not have a constitution until today, after 75 years of Israel's existence, because they could not agree on the role of religion in politics in Israel in the constitution. They could not write a constitution. And so they're running without a constitution because, again, the question of the role of religion is very divisive and very complicated. I think it will continue to be divisive and complicated in Tunisia and in the Arab world and in the Muslim world. And I think in a way that's normal and it's healthy. Debates are healthy. We have different opinions on religion. That's normal. You know, it's not unique to Islam. It's not unique to Tunisia. We have different interpretations. People look at religion differently. The question is, how can we live together and how can we build a democratic system that protects the rights of everybody, religious and non-religious, so that we can continue to have these debates about the role of religion. We're not going to solve these debates when we establish a democratic system. We are establishing a democratic system in order to continue the debate about the role of religion, but in a civilized way, in a non-violent way, in a peaceful way. Let us talk about all these issues. Let us talk about how we modernize our interpretation of religion, how we can appeal to the center, how we can appeal to the majority of the people who want to be Muslim, but also want to be democratic and modern at the same time. They don't want to choose between being a Muslim and being a Democrat or a modern citizen in the 21st century. They want to combine these two values. They want to live as a Muslim in the 21st century. And that is the majority of the people. So we need to continue these debates. They're not going to be over now or especially in a democracy. They will continue. But hopefully we can agree on democratic values that protects the rights of everybody, including the minorities, whether the minority is religious or non-religious or secular. Now, regarding the UAE and Israel in particular, also Saudi Arabia, why do they see democracy as a threat? And is it true that they only see political Islam as a threat? Look, these people are not stupid. They cannot say publicly that they are against democracy. They cannot say it internally and they cannot say it externally. Oh, we don't like the Arab Spring because we hate democracy. Nobody can say that. Even Putin doesn't say that. You know, he doesn't say I'm against democracy. He says, no, I'm for democracy. I just have a problem with political Islam. So they try to cover their hatred and their fear of democracy, which is very normal. If you are a dictator, you are afraid of democracy, of course. I mean, that's the very nature of a dictator, is that you are afraid of democracy. UAE, Saudi Arabia, all the dictators in the Arab world, of course they don't like democracy because it's a threat to their rule, to their dictatorship. So they say they are afraid that if democracy succeeds in Tunisia, sooner or later it's going to spread in the Arab world and it may reach them in Saudi Arabia or UAE or the Gulf countries, 10 years later or 20 years later. So they say, no, we want to kill any hopes for democracy in the Arab world so we can protect our regimes. In the case of Israel, would you be surprised that somebody like Netanyahu, who is committing genocide in Gaza and now even in the West Bank, he's killing innocent civilians day and night, would be afraid of democracy in the Arab world? Of course he would be afraid of democracy in the Arab world. He's a war criminal. He's a genocide maniac. And to him, democracy in the Arab world is a threat because he wants to dominate the Arab world. He wants to kill anybody who opposes him. He is a maniac. He's a crazy person. So, of course, these dictators and these maniacs are afraid of democracy. But I think that in the long term, democracy is the only way to build real peace and real stability, even on the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian conflict. Israel cannot rely on these dictatorships forever to protect it from the Arab street and the Arab nations and the Muslim nations as a whole. It's only through a peaceful negotiation and peaceful negotiation with democracies, not with dictatorships, with democracies that represent the people and the will of the people. That's the only way that you can achieve real peace in the Middle East, or real prosperity or anything like that. But right now they don't see it that way. They are afraid of democracy because it's a threat to their regimes and to their stability. And they think, and the problem is also they convinced a lot of people here in Washington and in the United States, they think that that is stability, that supporting dictatorship or the so-called Abraham Accord is stability, is equivalent to providing stability. Well, we know it's not true. There is no stability in the Middle East today or for the last 30 years. We know that these dictatorships are not stable and they don't provide stability to themselves or to the region or to the world. They are danger to themselves and to the region and to the world. But somehow, they are able to convince the West or the United States, especially that now we have the rise of populism in the United States and in Europe, that somehow it's okay to support dictators because they're going to provide stability, while we know from last 50 years that dictators can never provide real stability because they don't solve the problems of the people. They don't really address the problems of the people. And you have this tension, this huge tension. They are like volcanoes that are going to explode. We know Egypt is going to explode. We don't know when, but we know it's going to explode. We know Jordan is going to explode. We don't know when, but the people of Jordan are really, really mad and really, really upset with the king of Jordan because he hasn't done anything to support the Palestinians or the people in Gaza. And it goes across the entire Arab world. These regimes are not stable. And the level of anger and frustration in the Arab street is boiling over. We're going to have another Arab Spring, maybe a third, maybe a fourth, until we have real democracy. It's the only way out of these crises, of these instability. And to think that somehow we can avoid democracy and maintain stability, I think is a crazy idea.
Well, thank you so much. I would take that as your last and very wise words. I must say, Dr. Iqbal, I think the way you have summed up the conversation and brought these two tensions, democracy and stability, is very illuminating and very clear and refreshing to see.
That's, by the way, Ali, that's what we have been doing here in Washington for the last 25 years. We've been trying to talk to policymakers here in Washington. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. But we have been pushing forward that please stop supporting dictators and start supporting democracy. It's in your interest. It's in your interest to support democracy in the Arab world and in the Muslim world because it's the only way for peace and stability.
And that's exactly our mission. Just like CSID, our mission at ILM is also supporting the democratic forces in Muslim majority societies and beyond, to support peace and to, as you mentioned, to really reflect. We want the government policies to reflect the sentiment on the street, and it is impossible in the absence of democratic order. And with that, I thank you, and I thank all the participants for joining and very active participation. And I'm sorry that we missed Amul Azuz due to technical issues, but we hope to hear from her soon. I hand it back to my colleague Noor to close the webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali and Dr. Radwan. For me, I think before we close, it's really interesting as someone who's not really familiar with Tunisian politics, and of course, as a Malaysian, I have very little proximity. But a lot of the things you mentioned are also discussions that take place in Malaysia among politicians and policymakers. And I was just really surprised at how the vocabulary is very similar in some of the arguments that were put forward. So maybe next session in the near future, we could do a comparative, who knows, inshallah. Thank you everyone for your active participation. A recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube soon. You'll also see some bite-sized pieces of this really fascinating discussion today. And do follow us on our social media. We have Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For those who are very professional savvy, corporate savvy,